Hello everyone, this is Michael T. Bradley. Welcome back to Realms Remembered as we dig our way into 3rd edition. That's right, let's go ahead and sink our teeth into Return of the Archwizards, where the cover art, at least for the collected edition, not really, I don't remember what the original artwork was, but at least that cover artwork, as well as the logo for the Realms, gets a lot better, in my opinion. I think everything looks awesome. Like, even the 3rd edition core rulebook for the game just looks really nice. Of course, I've never seen the 2nd edition one, so maybe it was awesome too, but the 3rd edition just makes everything look aged and like it's on parchment and just has this really nice look to it, yet the text is still 95% readable, which is nice. There's a lot going on in this trilogy and a lot of points that I want to make, so I'm probably going to jump around a lot here. It's a very large focus book, although we tend to, for the most part, focus on character stuff. So if you've listened to these over time, you probably know I have kind of a love-hate relationship with Troy Denning. I think he's incredibly talented, but I think a lot of times his stuff is wasted on a lot of pointless things. That's kind of the case here, kind of not. If you'll recall, I left things, well, not I, the Realms authors left things where we were hinting a lot at shadow magic, although in a lot of ways the hints were put in, post hoc, but that's okay. We were hinting a lot at shadow magic. We're obviously building up to this, and I can't talk about the things we were hinting at without mentioning the fact that I totally kind of skipped some things that I think really should have been 2nd edition rather than 3rd, specifically a lot of the Sembia stuff. For some reason, I understood that Shadow's Witness fell into 2nd edition, yet the rest of the Sembia books I thought were 3rd. They really should be a little bit earlier in our timeline, and we'll get to those, don't worry, but let's focus on the transition here right now and talk about that. Interestingly enough, the two plot lines will intertwine eventually, at least so I've heard. This is not Denning's best work, by far. It's solid, and it reads pretty quickly, but there are some huge flaws. I'll start with the flaws so that we'll hopefully end on more positive notes. First of all, the entire climax of Book 1 is just really dull. Like, you're following this personal journey, you have these hints of things that are happening, and then all of a sudden we're bogged down by, like, a lich and a really sort of uninventive phylactery hunt. It's that whole thing is really annoying. And so the first time that I read this and the time that I reread it for this, I skipped and skipped and skipped stuff just to get to something interesting, and before I knew it, Shade was back and I had accidentally skipped that section, so I had to go back like 10-15 pages. And at that point, the whole love triangle BS is going on, and that was just really frustrating. Though that does bring up a good point that I'll get to in a little bit. I think the thing that's really frustrating about the whole Lich subplot there is that we have these interesting characters, and I wanted to find out more backstory to some of them. Like, for instance, especially, I can't remember her name, it starts with a V, Valera or whatever, the kind of main human love interest for Galarian, our main elf character. We know that she has a son, and we know that there's this Darksword backstory, and we basically get all of the little bits filled in, but I would have liked more of her backstory. I would have liked more about her, less about a freaking lich that doesn't mean anything to the plot. Denning tried to do a lot with the elves, which was kind of cool. I mean, you know, he made them seem decently interesting, and their haughtiness came across in a more believable way, I think. My main problem there is that a lot of them got a little too interchangeable. Especially the women who are having to deal with the kind of burly men in the siege, the middle one. I kept mixing up who was Galarian's sister and who was his girlfriend over and over again. And so essentially, just to sum up the main story here, basically, Galarian's a warden of a cemetery, and because of some actions of his, it leads to Shade, one of the Netherese floating cities, coming back. And they've lived on the plane of shadow for whatever it is, hundreds of thousands of years, or just thousands of years, whatever. They've lived there for a really long time. They come back, and it starts off where they are kind of Faerun's allies because of the other thing that came through underneath the Netherese desert, a Norok, I guess that's how that's pronounced, the Faerun, not Faerun, Faerun, which are these kind of oddly curved, pointed penis barb floating mind devils. So picture that, if you will. They're brought back, and the people of Shade are going to help Faerun fight these things, but eventually, of course, it's realized that the Shade Enclave have their own agenda, and they're changing the weather so that they can make Anorok back into the... I don't know what it was, a forest, whatever it was originally, and they're kind of getting rid of lots of other cities and changing the ecology completely in order to do so. So it becomes this huge fight against them in the end, and of course the Faerim are in the way as well. And along the way there's a stone giant. I mean, it's really all over the place. That was another thing I really wanted more backstory on, was the Shade Enclave. It really felt like, basically it was like, look, if you want to understand anything about the politics here, you're going to have to get a rule book of some sort, you know, whether it's the core book, or I'm sure there's some sort of Netherese, what's the word, not rule book, but not campaign book, but like campaign guide, or what, accessory book, you know, whatever that they're called. You're going to have to get one of those to figure out what's going on. There was just so much there, and they seemed so interesting, and it was kind of like, you really gotta read between the lines to have any idea what's going on with them. So that was, again, very frustrating, because it felt like there was this great story happening just underneath the surface, and instead we're dealing with a love triangle. Another thing I really disliked, which I'm sure doesn't surprise anybody if you've been listening to any of these for a while, is that Mystra's Chosen play a huge part in Book 3, and that just got really tiresome. It felt like Book 3, the entire tone shifted. And at that point, Galeron and his shadow journey were the thing that I found the most interesting, and they were just kind of swept aside. That was another thing that kind of frustrated me, is that, you know, shadow magic, is it good? Is it bad? I don't know. And in the core book, it seems to imply that shadow magic is different from the shadow weave. Well, I think Galeron's using the shadow weave, so what the hell is shadow magic? I don't know, and I haven't gotten... I should just read the rest of the core rulebook, I guess, but I haven't, and so I was just very confused. But in any case, first two books seem to be all about Galeron embracing the shadow weave, the shadow magic, although I guess it's not. Whichever one he embraces it. He doesn't want to at first, but he keeps needing ways to get his friends free, and you know, people are able to counter regular magic, regular weave magic, etc., etc., etc. And so he keeps dipping into it, and he has to fight his shadow self. I mean, it's this Jungian battle, which I really feel like Denning could have done so much more with, and it just felt so weak and kind of watered down. You know, after Faces of Deception, I really believe that Denning could write an awesome Jungian battle, but instead it's just kind of what you would expect. It's not bad, it's just eh. And then Book 3, all of a sudden Galeron shows up very much like Luke in Return of the Jedi. And by the way, if you didn't realize that Luke is a dark Jedi at the beginning of Return of the Jedi, watch it again. It is not about him saving Vader as much as it is about him redeeming himself. He is a dark Jedi at the beginning of Return of the Jedi. And that's how Galeron shows up, and he's like, oh yeah, shadow battle ain't no thing. You just gotta embrace it, done. It's not evil, it's not good, just whatever. And it's like, that never really seems to be resolved. There are questions like that that I really wonder, was the purpose, you know, by the editors or Denning or whoever, to leave that ambiguous so that you could go either direction that you wanted in your game? If so, that's really cool in a metagame sort of way, but it also really weakens the book. Back to my original point, Mystra's Chosen, they're like weird comedy relief all through Book 3. And that just feels... I guess it kind of feels like all the time they're like, you know, well, we could stop everything in 5 seconds, but, you know, that's not playing fair. And it's like, well, why the hell are you guys involved at all? And they get shrunken down, and I think it's supposed to be funny, and they get swallowed by the stone giant, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. On the topic of them, Elminster gets banished to hell along with all of Shadowdale towards the end of Book 1, and that's kind of a big deal. Which leads us into Elminster in Hell. I'm just going to go ahead and talk about it here before we finish up with Return of the Archwizards, because I don't have much to say. Again, if you've been listening for a while, you know that I said long ago I'd start trying to read Greenwood again with Elminster in Hell. To be fair, Elminster in Hell is a really fun idea in that it's essentially... I guess, a commentary track on all of Elminster's past short stories and novels, because the whole kind of basic idea of it is Elminster is banished to hell along with everything else, and of course, he is immediately grabbed by a demon, you know, and the demon's like, oh, I'm going to make you pay, and I'm going to laugh at your suffering, and you're going to make me famous, and blah, 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 blah. And so it's him ripping through Elminster's mind to kind of gain secrets and find his weaknesses and da-da-da-da-da. And so you get bits and pieces of different short stories and novels that Elminster has been involved in. As I say, a really fun idea, and essentially I'm assuming the idea was to go back through kind of Elminster's greatest hits, introduce people who didn't have a chance to get some of the out-of-print books, you know, to read through bits from them, especially the anthologies. I don't dislike the idea, it's like, essentially I'm ending up reading old Elminster, which I know I don't like. So, very quickly got to skimming through that. I don't even understand the ending. It seemed to not make any sense to me, and it's like, you know, obviously Elminster escapes and is out somehow, and yippee. Anyway, as I say, a fun idea, just, it's you know, you don't really get a taste of newer Greenwood writing from it, so I'll give Elminster's Daughter a try. We'll get to that when we get to it. The other book that takes place during this same time, it came out during the same time and is highly related, is Realms of Shadow, the anthology. Again, if you've been listening to these from the beginning, you know that I liked a lot of those books, a lot. A lot of those stories, a lot. It gets weaker toward the second half, but it's still a really good anthology book. A lot of really good stories in there. I highly recommend it. Some pros. I'll start with my favorite thing about the book. Completely, unabashedly loved the fact that after all the love triangle BS, and whenever there's a love triangle, I'm always like, you know, if only polyamory existed in the world, then these people could be happy. If only they would just grow up. And that's how this ends. I really liked that. We see a little taste of, like, how that can work with Elminster flirting with all these elven chicks, one of which is Galeron's mom. I thought that was great. It was like, this is the best I have ever seen Elminster. And then the ending, you know, essentially there's this love triangle between Galeron and this elf chick who he's always felt something for, and this human chick, I think Vala is her name. Vala sounds right. This human chick who comes along, and, you know, there's all sorts of sniping about the fact that the human chick has larger breasts, and blah, blah, blah. But in the end, they're just all together, because they're like, well, we both love him, and there's no reason why he can't love us both. The end. I loved that. I really, really, really loved that. I was so excited to see that. I find it kind of odd that in fantasy, where we have so many unusual and strange things all the time, that things like polyamory aren't more common. I guess next month we'll find out if it actually ends this way, but of course, I'm sure if you're reading this, you have at least dipped your toes into the Wheel of Time, right? And, you know, at least from what we're seeing in that book, it really feels as if that's how it's going to end, with a poly ending. Or else Rand will split into 3 in some freakish manner. But still, I guess that kind of counts as a poly ending. But yeah, it just seems such a, I don't know, such a common thing in my world, and so odd that so much fiction hinges on a love triangle. And I just keep yelling at the screen or the book, grow up! And speaking of Elminster earlier, he is given the title Elf Friend, which I think he's had before now, but it's kind of given a little wink-wink, nudge-nudge meaning here, which is great. I really liked the handling of Ruha and Malik. These are previous characters that Denning, you know, these are basically Denning's characters, and Ruha was the Benedine witch from those 2 books earlier, 2, possibly 3, I think 2. What was it, the Veiled Sea and the Parched Sea and the Veiled Serpent? I don't know, something. Anyway, those 2 books, one of which I liked. And, you know, she was the hero, she's a harper, she's good, da-da-da-da-da. In this book, she comes across as a crazy villain. And I really like the turnaround there. Because it's like, if you've read the previous books that she's in, you totally get why she's acting the way that she's acting. Whereas if you're just reading this book, she seems batshit, which I really liked the way that Denning handled that. And then on the flip side, Malik, who is the Seraph of Lies, works for Cyric, and is really proud of this fact, You know, and in his books, I guess just book, I think it was just Crucible that he was in. Was he in Prince of Lies? I think he was just in Crucible. You know, he is a protagonist, but very much a villain, and in this, he's not the protagonist, but he's kind of portrayed as a victim. And I really liked the way that played, because it just felt natural for him, and you had a lot of sympathy for him, and he seems to make friends with the Stone Giant in a real way. And I really enjoyed all of that. I liked the way that Denning played with our expectations there. The Fireme are unique types of villains. It's not often you find floating penis rapist mind messers. That's unusual, so I enjoyed the uniqueness of them as a villain. And though this definitely didn't feel as big as the Avatar trilogy, but what does, right? It felt like some decently big stuff happened here. Shade comes back. They almost sink Shade into the ground, but it appears that it's wobbling back onto its legs, if you will, at the end. There's a lot of stuff to deal. This is a real minor subplot, but it feels like it could have big ramifications with the Cult of the Dragon, this undead Draco Lich that has gained its freedom and seems to be... I can't remember. I think it was like part of the epilogue. Anyway, it seems like something could be brewing there. I guess Shade didn't bring back shadow magic. I guess shadow magic has just always existed, but it really feels like this, along with the other books that we've been reading, pull shadow magic into the world in a real way. I feel like I've talked for a pretty long time here. I'm going to try to make these things shorter going forward, but I knew this one kind of needed to be longer because this is such a big deal, and we're talking about 5 books altogether. There are, as usual, a lot of things that I'm not saying that I could say, but I think I've hit on the biggest points that I wanted to make. Feels like a decent start for 3rd edition. We have a fair amount of things laid down. You know, we kind of bring in a lot of things from 2nd edition as if to say, the world hasn't changed that much, you're fine, everything's okay, don't panic. But we have enough big things and enough kind of jumping off points thrown out there for people to play with. So that's cool. This is, of course, Denning's last work in the Realms until whatever it is that he's doing for the Sundering, or whatever it's called, the massive crossover thing that's coming out starting any day now, I think. Pretty soon. I think it's 2013. I don't know how far into 2013, assuming the apocalypse doesn't happen and take us all. So this is kind of a sad goodbye to Denning, but we have a lot of other really strong authors coming in, so don't give up hope or anything. Alright, I think that's all that I have to say for now. This is Michael T. Bradley, Realms Remembered.